Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Source Material Live. I'm your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight, we are discussing the book Truth, Red, White, and Black, which was a 7-issue comic book limited series written by Robert Morales, drawn by Kyle Baker, and published by Marvel Comics. The series focuses on Isaiah Bradley, one of 300 African-American soldiers experimented on by the U.S. Army in an attempt to create super soldiers. Published from January 2003 to July of 2003, the series is composed of 7 comics. The Future, The Basics, The Passage, The Cut, The Math, The Whitewash, and then The Black Vine. And we're discussing this tonight because in my research on Falcon and the Winter Soldier, if you've watched the show, there's a character named Isaiah Bradley who talks about being experimented on and being, the Black Captain America, and all of the trauma and grief that went along with that, and how that character affects Sam Wilson, the Falcon. And like I said, as I was researching the show in preparation for that review later on this week, as it turns out, and I didn't even know this existed, this comic is the basis for that character and largely inspired some of the themes and writings of that show. So rather than do the more recent Marvel Falcon and Winter Soldier comic, which no one would have cared about, no one would have listened to, I thought, hey, wouldn't it be better if we discuss something that is relevant and directly influence this television show? And joining me to do that tonight is Alexis Hejna. How do you do, madam?
Doing good. Kind of surprised if you didn't hear commentary from the corgi in the background already.
As soon as I hit record. But that's okay. That's how people know you're on the show.
Of course, Eddie knew it. It's like, okay, now it's time to start barking.
Yep. I knew. Well, he was singing along. He was going at the comic book, the comic book, because that's where the woof lives. Anyway, also back on the show is comic book artist in general, the guy that does all of our Long Road to Ruin title card pieces, of which I have hanging on my wall, and they're my most favorite things ever. Ladies and gentlemen, Benjamin J. Cologne is back. How do you do, sir?
Hey, how's it going? While I do not have, unfortunately, I do not have a corgi barking in the background. It is May 10th here, and what that means in New York City is that's when the 4th of July fireworks begin. So we may be hearing that somewhat in the back. I've been hearing them already. I'm like, oh yeah, it must be, it must be close to mid-May, so
it's about that time. I thought living in New York City, what you were going to say is we're still in the hangover of Cinco de Mayo.
Cinco de Mayo was relatively mild this year. 4th of July is going to be lit, though.
I'm sure. You guys can actually, be in the same room with each other in public again in New York. The quarantine is finally over. Your Lord and Dictator, Governor de Blasio, has finally allowed humans to be in contact with one another. How do you feel about that? How do you feel now that the dark cloud over New York City has lifted?
I'm going to celebrate by spending 2 weeks in Florida.
Perfect. Come, my son. Come to where we've domesticated the COVID, and we ride it to work, and we feed it, and we pet it, and we name it George. It's fine down here.
Hopefully.
All right, I'll go to Alexis, and then you, Ben. I proposed this, and Alexis, you were immediately on board. I think we can all, I can safely say for all three of us that this is a much more interesting book to talk about than, the Marvel-published Falcon and Winter Soldier book that they put out just because of the show. But beyond that, what intrigued you about this book when I proposed it?
Well, I had never heard of it until I saw some comments online during the episodes of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Somebody mentioned about how much they were taking from this book. And I went online, I Googled it, and I started reading a brief synopsis, and I thought, oh, wow, this sounds really intriguing. I should order this. And then I went to eBay and saw that it has been out of print for a while, and people are currently selling it for $300. And I said, oh, screw that.
Okay. Anything else before I move on to Ben?
Like I said, this just seemed like a really interesting book. We were actually talking about this when we recorded Tripped Up Trivia a few nights ago, which will be premiering this coming Saturday night, plug. about how we're all just sitting here going, why isn't Marvel reprinting this? Not only with Falcon and Winter Soldier having finished its run, but with just the way that our world is right now with the Black Lives Matter movement and such. We don't get why they're not taking an opportunity to reprint this, because it just seems like this is the right time that this story needs to be brought back into focus.
There's not enough room on the comic book shelves for this with all the Deadpool and, X-Men titles and whatnot. There's just not enough space, especially in an infinite digital medium. There's a lot of sarcasm there.
Oh, absolutely. How will I find room on my shelf next to this with the Hellfire Gala series?
So I put out that we were doing this, Ben, and we always love having you on, and you kind of pick your spots. I think the last time you were on was for Dark Victory, and or it was Three Jokers, one of the two, whichever came first. And I put this out there that we were doing this, and you were like, yeah, I will make my quarterly appearance to talk about this. So what excited you about this? What brought you back?
Well, I hope to make my appearances a little bit more frequent now that, I got my whole setup the way I like it. When this first came out in 2003, I saw it on the shelves, and I didn't buy it, but I tended to flip through it from issue to issue. Sometimes, some of the stuff, the idea of it grabbed me. We'll probably get into this a little bit more later. The art, at first at least, is not 100% my cup of tea, but I also recognize that there's a reason for that. And like I said, we'll get into that later. But actually revisiting it, probably for the same reason that a lot of other people have been, because of the exposure that Falcon and Winter Soldier gave it, which I'm very glad, because when it gets down to it, it's a really powerful story. It touches on a lot of unfortunately forgotten issues dealing with a lot of horrors that the United States has perpetuated on marginalized people in the early days of World War II, and
longer than that. Like
just to name one, yeah, of course. But seeing Falcon and the Winter Soldier and seeing the it's hopefully everybody's seen it. If not, spoiler alert, of course. But seeing Carl Lumbly's portrayal of older Isaiah Bradley, who is appropriately grizzled enough, but still looks like he could break a man in half if he had to. Just the weight that he gives the character really, really made me kind of want to revisit this. And I if I had to make a guess as to why Marvel is not reprinting it, I think in a practical sense, it may just have something to do with COVID screwing up a lot of distribution and a lot of decision making over the past year. But also, I have a sneaking suspicion there's already apparently going to be a Sam Wilson Captain America movie in the works, or season 2 of Falcon and Winter Soldier of some kind. I'm hoping that includes flashbacks to this story that we're seeing, flashbacks to an adaptation of this story we're about to talk about.
And that's the thing. They might not have known that people were going to go and research. I mean, I do research because I host a podcast, and it helps to know what I'm talking about every once in a while. But I don't know if they even put that much thought into it. That hey, in the writer's room, we referenced this, and we brought it up. It was like, hey, this is a good place for us to reference. People like when the Marvel Cinematic Universe references the actual books and storylines and characters. This is a good place for that. And they might not, and they said, but no one's going to go actually look up who Isaiah Bradley is and what this book was, and sometimes and it might not be the most forward thinking, but I can imagine them thinking that, and then lo and behold, it becomes a talking point.
I'll tell you this right now. One more thing, the instant that he made the episode where he first appears and he's mentioned by name, like I became the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV meme, like immediately when that scene took place. So I don't think I was the only one. Is what I'm saying.
No. I mean, look, the story came out in 2003. I imagine it sold 1 or 2 books, and people remember it, have read it, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe some people have discovered over time. There's a hardcover edition that was put out in 2009. I'm sure people bought that. So yeah, I would imagine of all the people, and a lot who watched Falcon and Winter Soldier, there were some who had the same reaction as you. But like I said, then there's me, who watched the show, and if I wasn't looking for things to talk about for that show, I would not have discovered this, because it's not like, there's a little Microsoft, paperclip that pops up and says, and this is referenced in a book that Marvel published. Most casual viewers, and Marvel has a very casual audience, did not put any more thought into it than that. So one of the things, and I don't want to spend too long talking about this, but I think it's important to set up some context here. One of the events in history that influences this book and the writing is the very real and very horrifying Tuskegee experiments from the 20th century, where airmen from the U.S. military, African-American airmen from the U.S. military, were experimented on and given syphilis, and they were told it was other things, and it comes up periodically throughout various discussions, and it like I said, it serves as an influence for what goes on in this book. Alexis, were you aware of what the Tuskegee experiments were? Did you learn about it after learning about this book?
I was actually talking with someone earlier about this, and I said, how is it that I have learned more about Black history from this book, the Watchmen series, and Lovecraft's Country than I ever did in school? I did not know about the Red Summer of 1919. We did not learn about the Tulsa race riots. We did not learn about Juneteenth. It's just, how disturbing is it that this is my first time even hearing about these things?
It's not, you have to go to college and take classes, because that's where this stuff gets discussed. It doesn't typically get discussed in a high school history classroom, at least not one that I was in. What I have learned about the specific mistreatment of African Americans in the 200-year journey of the United States, I got from reading books on my own and from a handful of college classes that I took. And if you spend enough time around educated Black people, they will bring up things like the Tulsa race those that know will bring up things like the Tulsa race riots, and the often not talked about secret history of Blacks in America. But yeah, I had to do a lot of education on my own. I think it's called something like Beyond the Bitter Waters or whatever, that actually talks about the systemic decimation of large-scale Black populations and Native populations in America. Not a thing they teach in school. Had to find it in a book. And and it's funny because I wasn't even in college when I found that book. I had a friend who was taking a graduate level social work class that dealt with race and social policy, and that was on the reading list. That and a book about Blacks and HIV. And I got it from her because she was like, "Oh my God, you have to read this." So I'm glad we're seeing now in more mainstream pop culture that you brought up The Watchmen, which I love and was one of my favorite shows of 2019, as I've said, and Falcon and Winter Soldier. We're getting into things like Tuskegee and eugenics in America, which is something else I want to bring up shortly, but I want to give Ben his turn. I'm glad that a lot of this stuff is coming out because there is a rich and dark and terrifying history that people need to learn about. I mean, it's not something we need to take into the street and start setting shit on fire, but I think people need to know. I think people need to get educated on this stuff, and I think sometimes the best way to educate people to begin that conversation is through something as general and as broad as the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How about you, Ben? What's your familiarity with the Tuskegee history?
Well, like you guys, that sort of thing wasn't taught officially in school. Like I went to, as a teenager, I went to high school in Central Florida, and certainly, the general like kind of iffy, tenuous relationship the United States has with its own history is kind of on full display in when you go to school in the South. You hear a very truncated and very sort of sanitized version of things. I had a couple of teachers here and there who would kind of anecdotally and as asides kind of get into very surface details of some of the darker stuff, some of the not so pleasant injustices that have occurred rampantly throughout the history of our country. And that gave me kind of a basis to later on do my own reading and talk, have discussions with friends, some of whom research this stuff a little bit more extensively, in some cases because they have relatives who were involved in some way or another in a lot of these events throughout history, either directly, indirectly, who were alive during that time and at least had some knowledge that it existed and passed that knowledge down. So yeah, this is the type of thing I also tell my nieces and nephews who are now all college age. Just don't rely on school to teach you everything you need to know. Get familiar with and learn to do it, learning on your own, because that's really how a lot of your education kind of fills in the blanks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I've mentioned before, in the wake of 9/11, I went through a couple of year period of doing deep dives into nonfiction. And that's how I came across another book. By the way, the first book I mentioned is Buried in the Bitter Waters, the Hidden History of Racial Cleansing in America by Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Elliot Jaspin. People should check that book out if you have time. But I went through this period where I was doing deep dives into various topics, and kind of as Jesse and I like to call it, wiki rabbit holes, where I would find a book that was interesting, and it would introduce me to these things I didn't know about, and then I would look those things up, and I would get more books, and I would be 4, 5, 6 books deep into a subject, and then I'd be like, okay, I gotta stop reading about this now and move on to something else. There was a period of time where I was a real smarty. And during this is where I ran into Edwin Black. Edwin Black is an author of nonfiction who's written some really great, I think his most popular stuff is about IBM and the Holocaust. But another book, the first book that I found of his was, which deals with the topic relative to what we're talking about tonight, with his eugenics, the history of eugenics in America. And the book is called War Against the Weak, Eugenics and America's Campaign to Create a Master Race. War Against the Weak is the gripping chronicle documenting how American corporate philanthropies launched a national campaign of ethnic cleansing in the United States, helped found and fund the Nazi eugenics of Hitler and Mengele, and then created the modern movement of human genetics. Some 60,000 Americans were sterilized under laws in 27 states. So, if you have a chance, Buried in the Bitter Waters and War Against the Weak, if you're into, if you're up for some light reading about America's horrible history, it's a really good book. All right, onto lighter topics of sorts. Let's get into Truth, Red, White, and Black. Set in the Marvel Universe, the series takes the Tuskegee experiments as inspiration for a tale that re-examines the history of the super soldier serum that created Captain America. Beginning in 1942, the series follows a regiment of black soldiers who were forced to act as test subjects in a program that would become the prototype for the formula used to turn Steve Rogers into Captain America. The experiment led to mutation and death until only one remains, Isaiah Bradley. Issue number 1, The Future. The story begins by introducing 3 black men. Isaiah Bradley, born Queens, June 1940, Maurice Canfield, Philadelphia, 1940, December, and Sergeant Luke Evans, Cleveland, June 1941. The everyday racism is shown. Bradley and his wife, Faith, are denied entry into a peep show at the amusement area of the World's Fair. Canfield was beaten by resentful stevedores while trying to organize them into a union, and Evans was demoted from captain after protesting the unjust death of a friend. After the attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent entry of the U.S. into World War II, all 3 men are enlisted into active military duty. All right, issue number 1. Alexis, what are your thoughts?
So, fun little bit of trivia here. The source that I read this on online, the link got screwed up, and I ended up reading volume 7 before I read, issue 7 before I read issue 1, and which it ends with the end, and that's when I messaged you going, so was it supposed to be this short? And you're like, it's 7 issues. I'm like, what do you mean it's 7 issues? What the hell?
Boy, am I glad we had that conversation hours ago.
Yeah, no kidding. I was like, okay, got this fixed. Speed reading, got it. But I hate to say it, I kind of, looking at it now, it's like, I kind of wish it had started with some elements of the last issue, kind of doing a bit of more of a flashback kind of a thing. Because now that you know where Bradley is and you look at where it starts, I think it actually has a bit more of an impact.
Yeah, I was a little taken aback that we're introduced to this cast of characters, and like a television show, it spends the first episode kind of giving you bits and pieces of their life and letting you get to know them, instead of just focusing on Isaiah Bradley. And I guess that's good, because if you haven't read this before, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to get affected by the serum and how it's going to affect people and what the outcome is going to be. So any one of these people could have been the star of this book. But yeah, I don't want to say it's a slow beginning because a lot's happening here. Bradley and Faith trying to get into. I thought it was hilarious actually, and a little, I was like a little taken aback that first issue within the 1 or 2 pages of this thing, we have naked women being drawn, and they're wanting to go into the peep show, and you're like, yeah. Right up front, man. Right up front. The issues of the day and the themes that they're talking about are brought to the forefront. It's just like, listen, it's not that we don't want to let you in. It's like the girls don't want to be... the naked girls in the peep show don't want to be objectified and made to seem like animals. And it's like, ugh. Stuff like that got said. But, ugh. And this is one of those things where if you're just into comics I just like a fun time. I'm just in for the fun read. This is not easy to get through. I loved it, but it's not an easy read, and it's not, in many ways, like a fun read. You know what I mean, Ben?
Yeah, I kind of had a similar experience with that, and, it starts off uncomfortable, and it gets more uncomfortable as things go on, for all kinds of reasons that you may not have even expected at first. You expect the casual racism, and you expect kind of the casual injustice and the injustice that we're familiar with, and it kind of starts from there, and then it devolves into straight up atrocity, as it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the way history in school, in high school especially, it's a little bit better in college, but the way that history gets taught in school, it's kind of, there were slaves, and then they stopped bringing slaves over from Africa, but there was still slavery. And then there's the fight for states' rights, which ultimately leads to the Civil War, and Lincoln frees the slaves. And then fast forward, and a black girl is walked into an Alabama high school by the military. It's like, wait, what the fuck? There's so much that happened in that time. And
exactly. They really do gloss over a good chunk, of black history in schools. But for the record, though, I gotta ask, the artwork in this book is very bizarre. You get some characters that are drawn pretty, I wouldn't say realistically, but I'd say pretty decently. And then you get this guy like the guy who's advertising the peep show, who frankly looks like he would not be out of place in a cartoon or a Ren and Stimpy episode.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with Sergeant Luke Evans, he's got something on the side of his head, which I thought at first was like an injury or something, but it stays there through the whole series, and I can't tell what the heck is going on with his head.
I thought it was like, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, like a keloid. You know, or black people, when they get cut on the skin, it tends to bubble up and just stay there. And I thought that maybe like that's what it was. Like he got injured. You know, he suffered a head injury, and that's like a keloid spot that's on his skull. What did you think it might have been, Ben?
Yeah, I just assumed that it was, an injury of some kind. I thought it might have been like a burn scar. It might have been shrapnel. It might have been something. Just from purely, in artistic terms, it's probably primarily done to just have a differentiating like physical characteristic for the character. But he goes into the fact that he was he had already been in active duty. He got busted down to sergeant, so he'd seen some action already in combat, and I just figured it was some kind of like and also Evans also talks about, he's the one that talks about the Red Summer, so it may have been an injury from conflict, but not necessarily from military conflict. He's been in all kinds of, physical altercations. So you just get the impression. It's meant to just convey in the simplest terms that, he's seen and experienced some shit,
Mm-hmm. I wanted to... Go ahead,
I guess I would have been okay with it if there weren't so many drawings where it's clear the artist just did a quick squiggle across to the side. That, okay, there.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into that more. Like I said, Kyle Baker has a style that's probably probably rubbed a lot of people the wrong way when it comes to the series. As I continued to read, I kind of I kind of got the impression that it was intentional, that the style of art was mostly done that way intentionally. But we can get into that as we go on.
Who's the artist that I always make fun of, and Jesse hates me for? He did the Lobo series with Sam Keith. Yeah, he's not as bad as Sam Keith, but I don't love... I love the story, I love the characters, I love the themes of this book. It's probably one of the best things we've read this year. I don't love the art in this. The art... And look, I'm all for the contrast of... Hey, we're saying some pretty bad shit about white people here, and so we're going to make a lot of the white people look as awful and as ridiculous as possible, and I'm kind of okay with that as an artistic choice. But you're not wrong, Alexis, when they're like, there's making them look cartoony villainy, and then there's full Ren and Stimpy. Especially Merritt at the end of this book. When Merritt's talking to Captain America, and they do a close-up, and it looks like... We were talking about this with... Oh gosh, I think it was maybe The Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse, or one of the cartoon shows that we reviewed, where and remind me, Alexis, what the animation style is, where it's like they change perspectives and it's like a close up and it's gross half the time.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think we were talking about that with the Animaniacs reboot, that we were saying there was a handful of drawings that were all done in various different styles, and a lot of the illustrations, it felt like there wasn't a real consistency to them.
Yeah, and that's the thing with this, is like you kind of get the you guys are the artists, not me, so I don't know what the term is here, but there's a very distinct art style where like lines don't connect and color seems to overflow past the line, and I'm okay with that as a choice. But then, and then it'll just switch to that extreme close-up, very detailed, almost The Boys look. But it's all gross and stupid looking, and I'm like, all right, I get it. White people suck, but come on, you made Merritt look like a monster. It's ridiculous. I wanted to just say one of the things that I like about this, and acknowledged but not often talked about, mainly just sort of kind of like back of the mind acknowledged about black culture in America, is what's portrayed a lot of times on TV, to the negativity of the history of black portrayal, is you either get like dirt poor, Southern black, or you get like ghetto drug dealing pimpy black. Sure, there have been obviously some positive portrayals of black people throughout the history of television. I'm not saying there hasn't been, but that's been the big complaint. It's kind of, like my grandmother used to say about Italians, they're either dumb or in the mob. Blacks, you're either on dirt poor or you're in the ghetto. And the truth of the black experience, and I can go all the way to like a movie like Glory that kind of brings this up. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Glory, but like they made a point of saying that there were blacks born and raised in the North, that had money, they had status, they were not, they were in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases treated as equals, and there was no issue, and and some of them, almost were like, there's an issue here, kind of a thing, and you get that. Distinctions with these three different black characters, having three different distinct black experiences in America, and I was glad that the author took time to say, hey, look, not every black is from the same exact place in the world, in time. You have blacks who come from money, you have blacks that have these different experiences, and so they're going to have different reactions to things. They're not all going to get along either. They're not going to see the world the same way. When they talk about like the barbershop conversation, the only place where blacks can really talk, and you get to hear different perspectives from because they all have different backgrounds. They are not Borg, so it might seem like a silly thing to bring up, but I feel like it needed to be addressed. That like, hey, someone took the time to make black characters distinctive and not just token black characters. Ben, you want to react to that at all, or are you good?
No, I think that was also a deliberate choice in the storytelling. I mean, obviously it's a deliberate choice in the storytelling, but it actually lends to seeing all of these different characters, and the three main characters that we're introduced to in the beginning, they all are not, like you said, they're not what you see sometimes in fiction of, stereotypically poor or destitute people. They're not all of them, with the exception of, Maurice Caulfield are wealthy in any way, but they're kind of working class. They're kind of, what would be considered middle class and, modest, but, comfortable means. And the common thread is that they still experience racism in one way or another. Like they're, in the case of Isaiah Bradley, the experience of being, at the World's Fair, and it's supposed to be, a specific event for black people at the fair, and he still experiences that racism
there is no pristine jewel on earth than the white woman. Don't you understand, Ben?
Yeah, and then it goes the same way. Caulfield is comes from wealth, but he still sees injustice being visited on his fellow man and people of his ethnicity, and he wants to take a stand against that despite being perfectly comfortable in his wealth. He still wants to be an activist against injustice. And then you see Evans, who is not protected by his rank and his standing and his status in the military. As soon as he comes up against authority, against white authority in the same power structure, he immediately gets quote unquote put in his place. So none of these characters are protected by the society that they attempt to contribute to, when it comes down to the prejudices of that time, of their time.
Just one last thing, and then we'll move on to issue 2. One of the things that also the comic addresses, and I think accurately, and I started to say this before with like that 200 that decades long period between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, that just Reconstruction, and that's all you get, But there was a distinct effort in American culture. It gets labeled as separate but equal, and it immediately leads to civil rights. But there's never really a very lengthy discussion over what separate but equal was, and it was sort of a tacit agreement of sorts between the races of, we're willing to live and let live, and we don't need to have slavery, but for the love of God, stay on your side of town. Let's not be interacting. And in cases where people were like, well, I'm not okay with this, whether you were white or black, and wanting to make a change, there was a concerted, often violent effort. Of course, I'm referring to, organizations and such, like Ku Klux Klan, for example, as one of the many, where they were like, nope, separate but equal. Stay over there, separate races. We can all live in this country. It's big enough, but not together. And it's better off that way. And anytime there was efforts to change it, it was always met with resistance. And it was like, as long as everyone kind of just agreed to stay in their own little fiefdoms, you tended to not, didn't always work out that way, to not have as much violence. But as soon as there were efforts to make changes, it was like, no. This is something we take very seriously. Stay the fuck over there. And it came from both sides. There were definitely people among the black community throughout history that were like, we don't really want to live among white people either. We're better off on our own, doing our own thing. And the comic addresses that to a small degree. And I was glad, because it doesn't get talked about very much. It's a hard thing, I think, to talk about. Issue number 2, The Basics. At Camp Cathcart, Mississippi, in May of 1942, Sergeant Evans leads the new recruit through basic training. The camp commandant, Major Brackett, entertains guests, Mr. Tully and Dr. Reinstein, who request 2 battalions of black soldiers to see if their methods apply to the, quote, inferior races. Brackett assembles the troops at 11 o'clock at night. Tully and Reinstein attend, accompanied by Colonel Walker Price of Military Intelligence. Price shoots and kills Brackett, like you do, then asks his aide, Lieutenant Merritt, to select 300 soldiers and get them onto trucks. It is implied that the remaining soldiers at Camp Cathcart were killed that night to preserve the project's secrecy. Let's all do a collective, and let's talk about this, Alexis.
Yeah, there's no way around it. There are so many parts of this book that just really are really hard to get through. I know there's a scene where one of the doctors is saying they need black blood because for the people they're testing on, and the doctor said, and the other doctor says, white blood works just as well, and he goes, okay, fine, and he's talking to Merritt. And he says, about that, and he says, well, Merritt, would you take an infusion of black blood? And Merritt goes, I'd rather die. And it just comes across so casually when he says it. Mm-hmm. And, there is no way around it. Reading this, you're just going, oh my God, 'cause this isn't pure fiction like that. People to this day still react like that, and it's so uncomfortable.
There was a bit on All in the Family. Do you know All in the Family, Alexis? Archie Bunker?
It was a little before my time, but I know of it.
Okay. Ben, All in the Family, yes, no?
Yeah, I've seen him. Okay.
So Archie needs a blood transfusion, or something along those lines, and he has to get it from a black donor for whatever the reasons are. I don't totally remember the episode. I just remember this one line. And he says something about well, with black blood in me, I'm gonna have. He's implying that he'll have a bigger genitalia or something. And Edith, who didn't give Archie a lot of jazz on that show, but definitely had a few choice lines or two, was just kind of takes a pause and looks at him and goes, Archie, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You're an idiot. But it's so true. That sentiment from the lesser educated folk about what magical properties black blood or in the case of, the radically racist, what impure blood it is and what it might do to the purity of white blood. What a real and horrifying thing. Just one other quick reference. Fucking this happened in Oz, where somebody needs like a tooth transplant or some shit, and he gets it's like graft from gums, and he gets a donor from a black guy, and it's one of the neo-Nazis, and he accepts the graft because he has to, and then he gets kicked out of the neo-Nazis because he's got impure blood now. And he rips his gums out. This is a thing. What else about this issue, Alexis?
I like how they do give a little bit more characterization to everyone in the background. For example, we got a character here called JJ. These characters have just been forced to train and climb through, I think it's like a cow pasture, and they're coming back covered in literal shit. And this guy, JJ, he doesn't strip down or anything. He just immediately jumps into bed because he's so tired. And they're like, dude, you just climbed into your own bed covered in feces. And he's like, I got laundry detail anyway. I might as well just sleep now. That just kind of put a big smile on my face. Again, that's some fun characteristics of just gives a little bit more fun to the character, even if we don't really get to know him that well.
Ben, your thoughts on issue number 2?
Yeah, once again, like the thread continues from issue 1 that particularly in the earlier wars of the 20th century, we get all of these people from all these different walks of life. Sometimes you get the occasional person like like Caulfield, who comes from a wealthy background, and in issue 1 it was the old chestnut of jail or the army, which was probably not uncommon throughout
it was
throughout
not.
Yeah,
it was a very common thing judges did.
Yeah, and
not just for blacks. It was basically any ne'er-do-well.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to touch on, and it's some of the few things here that I can speak of, not from my own personal experience, but from my family's personal experience, which is, the sort of, I really don't know if predatory is the word, but the United States military's almost sort of predatory, recruitment of poor people. And, with that, minorities get heavily mixed into that, recruiting for the military in poor neighborhoods. That certainly happened. My father's a Vietnam veteran, and he served when he was 18. He was dirt poor Afro Latino from Brownsville, Brooklyn, and he the army was kind of his way out of the hood. You see sort of hints of that throughout. Like they do a good job of balancing, different types of characters and different backgrounds, but you certainly get that through that undercurrent of, the army, wants to recruit from the most vulnerable people in society. That was true, that was true in World War II. It certainly became maybe even more obvious in the wars that followed it. But
the history of the military and its choosiness is really funny to me, because when it can afford to be choosy, it will not, it doesn't take elements it doesn't necessarily want or finds to be inferior. But in times of war, when we have to send, thousands and thousands of men to go fight on the front line, suddenly they're less choosy. Suddenly it doesn't matter anymore. And that is a long-running issue with the American military. And look, I'm not an anti-U.S. person. I'm an anti-military person, very much pro-military, very much pro my own country. But you'd be a fool to not recognize there are some deficits that need to be worked on, and one of which is the military only loving you when they need you and otherwise not loving you at all.
This is why we're doing a charity drive at the end of the month for tiny homes for homeless veterans, among other things.
Very good.
Another thing I just, as I was flipping through it, I actually completely missed this. Merritt goes and they tell Merritt to get the black soldiers on the trucks. And he says, Sergeant, you and your men get on the truck. And he goes, it's like, what's going on, Lieutenant? And he goes, just do as I say, boy. And I'm like, wait a minute. The sergeant just asked the lieutenant, and the lieutenant responded like that? Because Sergeant outranks lieutenant last time I checked.
Not in any military rank that I'm aware of. It's lieutenant is significantly higher than sergeant.
You sure? Because I just pulled up and it said the lieutenant absolutely does not outrank the sergeant major or the first sergeant.
Well, in the agency I work for, it does. So I don't know. It might change from agency to agency.
It may depend on like the situation, like the particular situation and what rank is present at what time. I mean, that's just my arm's length knowledge of like military hierarchy. It's just throwing it out there.
Because when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute, because I'm not going to lie, when it comes to military rankings, I'm kind of clueless. So I just Googled, does lieutenant outrank a sergeant? And that's the answer I got on Google.
Okay.
So,
I'm not going to dispute you.
Yeah,
I think it's a case-by-case type of thing.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm going to just say that probably is the case here, considering the fact that, that would really say a lot about a lieutenant, if he is lower than the sergeant, mouthing off to him, calling him boy, and being able to get away with it.
Anything else about issue 2, Ben, that you want to talk about?
Let me just, I'm going to make sure that I got everything. Just the... like I said, the sort of casual and then blatant racism kind of, goes back and forth. Like, Canfield gets harassed by, some random, some random enlisted men that apparently they worked in the motor pool. So I guess they were mechanics. And they get into a whole huge fight. And, Canfield kind of whips their ass, but he's the one that gets chewed out by the officer about it when they get caught, and then he just kind of gets sent back to the barracks. The poor guy was just trying to use the bathroom, the segregated like out back behind the behind the building bathroom.
Yeah, with the sign on it says "Beware of the leopard." Yeah,
and they're still giving him they still have to give him a hard time about that, and so. You get the sense that Canfield doesn't. It irritates him, but he kind of feels satisfied that he kind of gave as good as he got.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, we see little bits of that, and it's kind of meant to sort of come to a head as things go on, and as the sort of racially motivated injustices start piling up and start getting worse and worse, and harder to kind of wave off.
Issue number 3, The Passage. While the families and friends of Bradley, Canfield, and Evans are being told the men have died in training accidents, the soldiers have been taken to an underground bunker where they are injected with the super soldier serum. Ultimately, fewer than 10 men survive the serum treatments. They board a ship, HMS Pynchon, for an unknown destination. So you're naked, and you're strapped to a table, and there's a nurse injecting you, and she says, quite lovely, just relax. You'll be okay. Like, yeah! This was like the first distinctive memory I have of this issue, was that. And I remember where I read it, that was what a lot of the comments were on. It was like, how could you, how can anyone have the expectation that anyone would be okay with this? So clearly, being forced to do it. And, just relax is a bit ridiculous. Just the absolute dehumanization. I mean, with the exception of it's an underground like warehouse type bunker, and and there are evenly spaced gurneys for these guys to be lying on. The way that it's drawn, there's sort of a nod, kind of an implication to, the old slave ships, blacks just piled on top of each other as they were brought over from Africa. It's gross, The artwork implies horror and grossness, and that's the first thing that I noticed about that particular part of the issue. That's the part that stayed with me. The other thing, the inhuman nature in which they're dealt with. Obviously, experimenting on human beings is illegal, but they're like rats, guinea pigs, literal guinea pigs. It's like one of them gets injected with the serum. They're like, okay, 5 cc's of the serum, and he blows up. Like, all right, well, clearly that was too much. Like that was a human being you just blew up. But in the eyes of the people doing the experiments, for the greater good, good. It's not a human. It's not a person. And there's so much to ask about that. It's like, well, not a person because he's black, not a person because the whole point is to have something to experiment on. What is... It's so laden with...
The answer to all of those things is yes.
Yeah. It's so laden with depth and intrigue, and it's like, just... The question often gets asked of, like, Nazis is like, well, how could you follow... how could you just blindly follow orders? And sometimes, you're just in situations where you're not thinking about what it is you're doing, or who you're doing it to. And maybe you are, and you just don't care because you don't see them as a human being. And that is the unfortunate history of our people. Alexis, issue number 3.
That scene is absolutely terrifying. I mean, there's nothing... It's a mirrored room, so, his guess of whether or not that's a two-way mirror and he's being seen on the other side is as good as anyone else's guess. And yeah, he gets an injection, they leave, he just swells up like a balloon and explodes, and then the next scene is they're recording the results and sending in a dude with a literal mop and bucket.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I think I kind of said, geez, and I got freaked out from that scene in the first Ant-Man movie with the lamb.
This is a bit heavy, huh? A bit much?
Yeah. It really is. And then you get the scene where I think his name is Larson comes back in, and he survived the test, and now he looks like Hagrid from, I don't know, Harry Potter or something. He's completely swollen.
I was saying, he looked like a leader, complete with, like, swollen brain.
Yeah, and they're like, well, consider you're the first guy to come back alive. I'd say you look pretty good.
You laugh because, like, how else are you supposed to handle the awkward seriousness of this book? But yeah, it's all... This is as horrifying as book as you can get without actually being a horror book.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, your thoughts on issue number 3?
Yeah, so I think I might have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can.
Man, take your time, man. We're having a good discussion here. You do your thing.
All right. Well, this is where I have to bring the art back up again, and we have to remember, like, and I'm familiar with Cal Baker's. I actually was not familiar with Cal Baker's art before this book, before I, casually flipped through it in a comic book store back in 2003. And I became more familiar with his artwork as time went on. And he, for the most part, does have kind of a very deceptively, like, cartoony. It's not too far off to call it, like Ren and Stimpy stock, because John Kricfalusi, who created Ren and Stimpy, was heavily influenced by Bob Clampett, and I can guarantee you so is Cal Baker, in terms of stylization, in terms of art style. And the thing about that is, the way that works here is he kind of dials up the cartooniness. Like, Cal Baker's art style is generally pretty cartoonish and sort of exaggerated features, but not usually to the extent that they are in this book, which kind of is eyebrow raising. Like, the farther, it kind of made me wonder the farther I got into the book, and then I got it. And the thing is, these first 2-ish issues are kind of doing the job of lulling you into a false sense of security. You're kind of meant to subconsciously, through the artwork, think that this is going to be one type of story, all the while these increasingly more horrible, horrific things are happening, and before you know it, you're seeing true like body horror done in a very simplistic, cartoony style. It's meant to make some of the more horrific stuff palatable. First of all, it's also meant to shock and surprise you. When you start seeing, even the few guys that survive the super soldier process come back and, are obviously deformed and mutated, but they are functionally, made functionally stronger and faster, and that's really the only, all the goal there was to be achieved. Talking a little bit about like Captain America in specific, if you go back and if you've ever read like the original Captain America comic, it's all very like Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's Jack Kirby doing his thing and giving you the swashbuckling World War II style adventure, and this comic, this true comic implies that there's all of this horrible stuff going on underneath the surface that you weren't privy to that in order to get this, blonde hair, blue eyed Steve Rogers, and, to have the experiment that gave him, the body and the physique and the will of a god, all of these horrible, despicable things had to take place under the surface. And it's, like you said, it is in its own way kind of a horror comic-ish. There's like a lot of body horror going on that you're meant to be unnerved by, even though the art style is cartoony, even though it seems, proportions and things seem off. You're kind of meant to feel off, is what I think. I think that was a very deliberate choice in the art style. And I think it did the trick, especially if you, like I said, if you go back and look at some of the the art by Kirby and Simon and the original Captain America comics. It's an interesting juxtaposition between the type of story they told then and the type of story they're telling here.
There's a lot of parallels in the Super Soldier story as it's told here, and you kind of summed it up, Ben, when you're talking about like in order to get to the formula that gave Captain America his powers, it had to be done on the backs of countless amount of African Americans. And isn't that kind of the story of America? There's and really not just African Americans, but the Japanese that came over, the Chinese, the Latinos, and not even non-white ethnicities, but those that came over in the second and third migrations from Europe, who, look, the Irish and the Italian and the folks from like Croatia, what would become Yugoslavia, and not be Yugoslav, Slavic. I couldn't remember the word.
I bring this up a lot. I bring this up a lot when I talk to people about this because I've done research on it. 80, 90 years ago, what was considered white is very different than what is considered white now. Yes.
Right now, we're kind of all one big happy family, but there was definitely this, of the, English Germanic whites that came over, in revolutionary times, and then the second and third wave of white migration, where those were the mongrels. Those were the ethnically not pure whites that they were coming over that this country did not want. Send us you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, and then there's white people going, fucking send them back, man. No Italians, no Slavs, none of these people. Ugh. But it's all of those people, all of those that I just mentioned, that built America. In many cases, with not just with their sweat, but with their blood and their lives. The untold story of America is that this country is built on a lot of death. A lot of death.
There is also one last thing that happens in this issue that's kind of important, and that is that the families of all of these people that are undergoing the experiments, we see like they're all being falsely informed that their family members have died.
Yep.
That is also so that legally, I guess, they don't spell it out, but you're meant to understand that legally now these people are dead and they no longer exist, and therefore we can do with them whatever we want.
Right.
So that's that other layer of dehumanization. You're not even alive anymore. You do not exist. You died. And as far as everybody that you knew and that everybody that you cared about and everybody that cared about you, you're dead.
Mm-hmm. And linking back to how we started the discussion about, and that's why I brought it up, so it might seem like, oh, he's going in some weird tangents, but there's a reason I'm bringing these certain historical elements up, and that is, it always goes back to, it doesn't matter whether or not we're still having slavery in this country. We don't want to live in a society where we're equal to blacks. That is the mentality carried by a lot of white Americans, a lot of white male Americans, because, boy, I haven't even touched on the women thing yet. And we're not going to in this particular discussion. That's a discussion for another day. But my point is, like, take the word slavery and replace it with soldiers. It's all the same stuff. We are property. We want to do your chattel. We want to do what we want with you. And we want to face no repercussions, and we want to get no moral judgments, and it's for the greater good. The greater good. And it's horrifying. And I keep using that word, but I don't know how else to express it. It's just, the author of this piece really went out of his way to say, there's a lot to the black experience, and a lot of it's not pretty, but it needs to be acknowledged and discussed. Any thoughts before we go forward, Alexis?
Hang on, I'm trying to get... I was about to mute myself. I was like, I don't think we want this great speech to be interrupted by a lab puppy who's trying to get her older brother to play with her.
That's color. Earlier today, we doing the Mania of WrestleMania 2, there were sirens in the background, making it real authentic.
Nice. Yes, no, I'm sorry. Cleo just wants to play, so she's jumping up and snapping at my arms and fighting my legs. Like, come on, I'm bored. And I'm like, I'm working! How do you explain to a 4-month-old puppy that you can't play because you're working? No, that... Like, so we get the great bit with Sergeant Evans discussing the Red Summer in here. And again, I had not ever heard of this until I read this book today. And I Google's like, this was real? And I Google, I'm like, how the hell have I never heard of this? How has this not come up in any way, shape, or form? It's kind of haunting, to look at your own history and realize just how ugly things were, and that you were part of a society that is trying to paint over the ugliness. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have politicians right now who are saying that there are certain parts of American history we should not teach. I mean, what was that line from the one Louisiana senator about we have to look at the positive aspects of slavery?
Yeah. Look at how much cotton we have now and how rich it made us. Clearly this is a positive thing, right? I don't know over Ben's anger if he caught my snorting with derision, but it was there.
I understand. I'm just, if I, we laugh to keep from crying. It's,
Yes. Do you say what's on your mind, Ben?
No, I have my views on this sort of thing. If I start talking, this is going to be a very long show.
8 hours later, and I'll tell you another fucking thing about white people.
I'll just say, as somebody who has compared to so many others, thankfully, mercifully experienced very little, racial prejudice in my life, which is not to say zero, but very little. it's still, it still hurts and it still stings and it's still a reminder that, man, we got a long way to go still.
Mm-hmm.
That's my way of, making that point without, taking 2 more hours to make it.
Your list of grievances. Anything you want to say, whether you want to say it or not, it's always an open space here. And we're always ready to hear it. The Red Summer, for those that don't know, is a period from late winter through early autumn of 1919, during which white supremacist terrorism and racial riots took place in more than 36 cities across the United States, as well as one rural county in Arkansas. The term Red Summer was coined by civil rights activist and author James Weldon Johnson, who had been employed as a field secretary by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, as we know it, since 1916. In 1919, he organized peaceful protests against the racial violence which had occurred that summer. And it goes on from there. I'm just reading from the Wikipedia. But if people want to learn more about the Red Summer as referenced in Truth, it's obviously easy enough to find. I want to take a quick pause for the cause here, pay some bills. This is a great discussion, but we still need to talk about Grammarly. And Grammarly has AI-powered products that help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, and spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2Mnetwork to download Grammarly for free. Alrighty. The back half now of this story, where it starts getting real interesting. The cut. In July of 1942, the super soldiers have halted a convoy in Germany's Black Forest, but they are dismayed to discover they have succeeded only in stopping medical supplies from Koch Pharmaceuticals. 2 months later, in Sintra, Portugal, only 3 soldiers remain: Bradley, Canfield, and Evans. The trio are discussing the uncanny parallels between comic book hero Captain America and their serum treatments when Merritt goads Canfield into a fight. While trying to restrain Canfield, both Evans and Canfield are killed. Bradley is injured. Price tells Bradley his family's survival depends on the United States winning the war, and then describes a suicide mission that Steve Rogers would have taken in Germany were he not delayed by weather in the Pacific Theater. All right, Alexis, your thoughts on issue number 4.
One of the things I think is kind of interesting is that it becomes very easy in these books to forget that they did publish Captain America comics alongside the actual Captain America's exploits, and then seeing this character read the Captain America book, it's kind of jarring because it almost makes you feel like you're being pulled out of the comic book world itself and almost into our world. Because how many soldiers probably read comic books during their downtime? How many of them just had a couple of funny books, as he called it, stuffed into their bag? I was like, oh yeah, we got a break. I can flip through this. Not to mention,
there was a concerted effort, I think, to actually send comic books to soldiers, among other things.
Oh sure. I hate to say it, but one of the things I am so glad to see was that Merritt did not get away from being just the world's biggest jackass, because we see him in the hospital after he's had the living snot kicked out of him by the others, and they say Private Merritt. So yeah, he got demoted pretty damn fast.
There can be a little bit of justice here and there, which is nice. Anything else about issue number 4?
I love the bit with Bradley's wife storming in, and they're just like, look, there was an explosion, you probably can't tell from the body. And she's going, I saw the corpse you gave me. It's a skinny white dude. But it's just so gratifying that she's not taking this lying down. They're talking down to her. It's like, oh, you probably just don't recognize you. She's like, oh, don't give me that bullshit.
Right.
This woman has fight in her, and she knows something is wrong. And she's not going to let them talk down to her because she's a woman or because she's black. I really, really appreciated that scene.
Mm-hmm. They did a good job of writing. What little they have her do, they make the most of her page time in this book. And she's written very well. Ben, your thoughts on issue number 4?
Just that it's this is kind of the point where we're kind of clearing the decks for the what amounts to sort of the climax of at least Isaiah's story in this in this comic. All of his comrades are have either been killed or killed each other at this point. So he's kind of left with nobody. He's kind of left with nothing. I want to throw in also just the there's an interesting thing when you finally see Isaiah Bradley at the towards the end of the issue in the Captain America costume, and he's carrying the shield with the double V of victory, home and abroad. That was intended during World War II to be a very powerful symbol of patriotism, depending who you ask, bordering or maybe even going past the border, propaganda for the African American community. And that was kind of a stroke of brilliance, I think, having Isaiah Bradley carry the double V shield in a symbolic way, the same way that Steve Rogers carried the stars and stripes on his shield. That I thought that was great. And this also goes into at the beginning of this issue shows all of these super soldiers going into Germany on these covert operations and just laying waste to all these Germans. I know, you mentioned, Alexis mentioned the Captain America comics of the day, and, I'm familiar with the history of not just, Captain America comics in general, but Jack Kirby in specific, who co-created Captain America, and also served in World War II under Patton in Germany and I think in France. He did those the original early World War II Captain America comics before he served, but a lot of his experiences in World War II later on informed a lot of his later Captain America stories when he would come back to the character, in the 60s and 70s. Kirby was in a way he did a lot of these same things. He was a scout in World War II, which they say is not a position that you take in active duty combat unless A, you have a death wish, or B, somebody else has a death wish for you. Because it's literally going into enemy territory and doing recon and coming back. And usually, a lot of people that do that kind of work don't come back alive, which is what we find Isaiah Bradley doing. I mean, he's also meant to sabotage the death camps, but it's a similar act of going in under cover of darkness. I don't know if that's intentional, if that was intentional to call back, Jack Kirby's service specifically, but it actually kind of works. And it's the same thing. It's, he may be the last living super soldier, but they still consider him to be infinitely expendable. Like, they'll use him as a blunt instrument if they, for as long as they can. And then, if he happens to get killed along the way, or as we see, as we eventually see captured, they leave. They more or less leave him to twist in the wind.
He is, as Rambo said, expendable.
Right.
All right. If nothing else, then we'll move on to issue number 5. In October 1942, Bradley steals the Captain America suit and parachutes behind enemy lines in Schwarzenbittel, Germany, where he successfully completes the suicide mission to destroy a laboratory operated by Dr. Koch as a Nazi concentration camp. After killing Koch, while seeking shelter from gunfire, he enters a gas chamber filled with women. The gas kills them, but only weakens Bradley, and he is captured. The story flashes forward to present day and closes with Steve Rogers in conversation with a woman in a burqa. who asks why Rogers thinks Bradley is dead. So the thing that stood out to me, other than the coolness of Bradley in the Captain America outfit doing Captain America stuff, is when he walks into the gas chamber and he's like, "I'm here to save you," and the women are like, "No," and they like jump on him and die by the gas, and it speaks to the worst parts of human nature. It speaks to racism. It speaks to sometimes just the inherent stupidity of it all. You know, the need, the intrinsic need for people to cut off their nose to spite their face. You're in a gas chamber. You're going to die. But the wrong colored guy came to save you, and so fuck that guy. Yikes, man. And it's so true. And it broke my heart. And then it's like, from just a narrative, like adventure story perspective, you're like, oh, gosh. Best of intentions always gets punished. Never goes without punishment, I think is how it's phrased. You know, there he is, just all twisted up from the gas, after, you know, he tried to save these people and they wouldn't listen to him. Just, it's the one part of that book that really stood out to me. One of the parts of the whole story that really stood out to me. Alexis?
The images of him finding the bodies that have been experimented on, these are going to haunt me for a long, long time. He freaking finds a room with literal heads in jars. He finds a warehouse filled with tables, operating tables with bodies all over it, and just stacks, literal stacks of corpses. And you see him, he's told to bomb the place. He's told, you know, get rid of all the evidence, get rid of anything that they could use to continue their work. And he puts a thing of dynamite, I'm assuming it's dynamite, next to the stacks of corpses, and he's crying. And you feel that. You feel every ounce of that. These people are not, you can't save them, they're corpses, but just realizing what they went through and how it parallels what he went through. It's so haunting. It's terrifying. It really is.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, this is the gut punch that the entire series up to this point was building towards, I think, and the parallels between, you know, the people on the tables for the experiments and what we've already seen, you know, and what presumably Isaiah's gone through and what he's witnessed is pretty clear. And it's like, you know, I've gone halfway around the world and it's all the same. It's, you know, it's just more, you know, more horror no matter where I go. And, you know, and also the fact that these, you know, it's pretty heavily implied, you know, it's as implied as it can possibly be without actually stating it, that these were probably, you know, these were probably imprisoned, you know, Jewish prisoners that they were experimenting on, which was, you know, I don't know specifics, but I know that was certainly a thing during the Holocaust, and that, you know, running parallel with, you know, with what the experiments being done to, you know, black soldiers in America. It's you get like I said, it's a gut punch. It shows, you know, this is the enemy, but they, you know, these are the enemy, and we're, you know, in this way we're no better than them, at least from Isaiah's point of view. You know, nobody ever goes to war thinking they're the bad guy. That's the other thing. Everybody will find a justification for, you know, for what they do, especially when, you know, when they're in as deep as we see in this issue. So it's just one, he opens door after door, and it's a horror show behind every door, and there's just no end in sight, and then until finally, he's, trapped in a room with, all of these prisoners who I'm not sure I interpreted it quite the same way that you did, Mark. I mean, it's certainly possible that he saw that all of these women in the gas chamber saw this black man and wouldn't accept his help. I just looked at it as these were such beaten down and frightened and traumatized people that they probably would not have accepted help from anybody, because they probably would have just thought it was, something that was going to lead to more torture.
That's fair. Given the tenor of the book, I couldn't see it any other way, but that might just be me.
It does say him being in the gas chamber does lead to what I honestly think is one of the most terrifying frames I've ever seen. When the gas starts pouring down, you see a silhouette of two women, and the numbers that have been tattooed on their arms are glowing. Oh my God, that's just so freaky.
And this is why you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have tattoos. It's at least one of the reasons. The tattooing of numbers on people has become ingrained, thus not getting tattooed at all, has been ingrained in Jewish culture.
I do, however, have to give credit to the artwork on this thing, not only for how haunting it is, but the smoke and the gas building up at the top, you can clearly see was actually done with thumbprints or fingerprints in general. So that's actually a very creative choice.
It is. Ben, we kind of cut you off there. You were starting to finish up your point.
This is, if we're talking about issue 5, we get kind of the surprise, sort of twist ending at the end of part 5, where we now are transferred to, first of all, we're kind of meant to assume that, Isaiah was captured and either killed or tortured to death. And at the end, we see somebody else is narrating the story. We assume that it's his wife at the beginning, but somebody else, she's actually engaged in a conversation with someone else. And we turn the page to the last page, and it's Captain America. It's Steve Rogers. And we're kind of, it's a bit of a surprise because we're not entirely sure, the story is not entirely revealed why this conversation is taking place and what Cap knows about Isaiah's story at this point. And then we start going into the sort of the conclusion of the story, and we find out where it was all going as far as in the present day.
Issue number 6, The Whitewash. 5 days before his visit with the woman, Rogers questions Merritt, now incarcerated at Lompoc Federal Prison. Merritt is implicated in the destruction of Reinstein's notes, and Rogers confronts him with photographic evidence of Merritt's sympathy with Nazi causes, including the scraps of a Captain America uniform. Flashing back to 1942, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels make a proposal to capture Bradley, fight for Nazi Germany, and they pledge to free black people in America. Famous last words. Bradley simply replies, "Guys, no, my wife would kill me." Shifting back to the present, Merrick explains how experiments on the black soldiers were used to perfect the super soldier serum for Rogers, and how Nazi Germany came to capture Bradley. Although both Merritt and FBI agent Spinrad, who is assisting Rogers, are familiar with the story of Isaiah Bradley, it is the first time Rogers has heard of him. As they walk away from an agitated Merritt, Spinrad tells Rogers how his grandfather helped Bradley escape Nazi custody. So 2 things about this issue I want to address before I turn it over to you guys. One, is there any more of a hilarious example of cognitive dissonance than a Nazi sympathizer asking for an autograph from Captain America after that conversation? I was like, wow. Go ahead.
I just adore what a pathetic sack of shit Merritt is made out to be in this issue.
Mm-hmm.
He gets nothing but what he deserves, as far as, how big of a scumbag he is, and what we're told about him in the time from that point, since World War II.
It struck me as so funny. It's such a heady, serious, and depressing book that this can be, that there are moments of levity, even levity in kind of a dark, in kind of a dark theme. This idea of a white man who cannot imagine a world in which Captain America wouldn't agree with him, and not only wouldn't agree with him, but be more than happy to give him an autograph. And it's like, how are you able to be this disconnected from Captain America asking you out about the history of Black Captain America, and then saying you're a Nazi sympathizer and you're going to get charged in addition to what you've already been sentenced for? And he's like, I agree with what you're saying, and I'm here, and I hear you, but can you sign this autograph, Captain America, because I really idolize you? And Captain America's like, Barak? Like, what the fuck? I love it. Like, cognitive dissonance in human psyche is real. Go ahead, Alexis.
It's real, and we have seen so much of it, I'm sorry, over the last few years. I'm sorry, I know we don't like to go too political with this.
Say what's in your mind. It's okay. You're in a safe space here. No one's going to yell at you.
This is exactly what I see with Trump supporters.
Mm-hmm.
These people who are blindly following the horrible things he said and thinking that they're in the right. These guys are following people who are literally waving Confederate flags and Nazi flags and thinking that they're patriotic Americans. Merritt is a caricature of what we have seen so clearly in our recent human history. I have no doubt in my mind that those people who stormed the Capitol in January of last year would think they were doing the right thing. Would think that they are leading to a better America. And if Captain America was real, they would say, you're on our side. You know that Trump's the better leader. Will you sign my comic book?
The tragedy, maybe the irony of the Trump presidency, and this is all I'm going to say on the subject. I'll give you a chance, both if you want to. You don't have to. A chance to respond. And I said this. I'm on record as already talking about this. Robert and I talked about this when Trump got elected. It is a fact that there has always been, and probably always will be, to one extent or another, an undercurrent of people believing in separate but equal. And I mean all kinds of people, not just white. There is an undercurrent of racism in all kinds of people, not just white. But in terms of what Trump was tapping into, it was the specific undercurrent of the white male American, and in some cases female American, that felt disenfranchised by the culture, by the lack of opportunity, perceived lack of opportunity, changes in the economy, changes in the work economy in the sense of job replacement of a human by computers and robots and such, the shift in jobs overseas, and the cognitive dissonance and disconnect of blaming all of that on other and not taking it upon oneself to better one's life. It's their fault. It's your fault. It's everyone else's fault. It's not my fault. That all of these things that made me an important leader in this country by just the auspices of being a white male, all of that was taken from me, and now I have nothing. And I'm mad. And I'm angry. And I need someone to kick, and I need someone to speak for me because Hollywood doesn't speak for me. Nobody with a megaphone, nobody with a voice, nobody with a platform speaks for me. The angry, disenfranchised white man, American white man. And then and Trump, for all of his deficits, clearly saw that, that's out there, going out amongst the people, and was like, I will speak for you. I'll be your champion. And he fucking won an election based on that. I mean, there were other elements to it, too. But if anything gave Trump that first victory, it was speaking to all of that and championing it. And people going, oh, thank God, someone who speaks for me, so now I don't have to better myself or come to the brutal realization that these things were not done to me. that I have to make changes in my life. And, and to one degree or another, there's merit. And, there's the character merit in all of that. Just right smack in the middle of it. A guy who is very much from that mindset of, I, by virtue of being a white American man, am the most important, most wonderful thing there is in the universe, and I need to be at the top of everything, and everyone needs to be beneath me. Why is this such a hard thing to understand? And you're like, most people hear that and be like, yeah. It's not... Well, has that got nothing to do with reality? Unfortunately, it's a belief held by many, whether they choose to voice it or not. And then it gets masqueraded and piled upon and changed into something maybe a little bit more palatable. But there it is. That's the ugly truth of it. And people may listen to this like, I just wanted to hear him talk about the stupid comic. Well, the stupid comic has a lot to say in a time that needs to have good, intelligent debate and conversation. Your thoughts, Mr. Colon?
As to, current events, that speaking too much about that is going to have me speaking far too more than I'd care to from a place of anger. You know me, I get angry about, stupid trivial stuff, and that's pretty funny. But
yes, I've seen your Facebook feed.
Yeah, but when I have to get if I have to get upset about stuff like this, it clouds my judgment, and it clouds my critical thinking, and it usually clouds my communication of that. All I'll say is that I've got two nieces and two nephews. Each are, two of them are 18, newly 18 years old. They will both be graduating from high school 1 week from today. And two older ones that are right now that are 22. And this is a world that they have to grow up in. This is a society that they have to grow up in, where they give me a lot of hope for the future, but they are also dark-skinned and curly-haired, and they also have given me sort of a reason to have some fear about the future as well. And I'm hoping, I talk a lot of shit about, being cynical and being this. I am not a cynical person about the future. I like to believe that we can be better. Being a comic book fan has kind of done that to me. Being a fan of superheroes has kind of given me, a sense of hope about even, the most dire of situations. So I know for a fact that people that we talk about merit in the story, to bring it back to the comic actually, and we see he seemed at the beginning we talk about what a caricature he was portrayed as. As this story goes along, you start to realize maybe he's not as much of a caricature as we once thought, and kind of the more physically ridiculous he looks, the more realistic he starts to seem as a character that can actually exist in the real world.
Yeah, it's portrayed as the mirror reflection of the hideousness of parts of America.
Yeah, and that's, once again, I believe it's very intentional. Like I said, this, at a glance, this comic, you get one impression of this comic. Upon closer inspection, it is in so many ways so much more than what it appears to be on the surface. This is a very good example of that, and I know for a fact that people like Merritt exist, and my consolation is the belief that they are doomed to extinction. That is what I believe and what I hope.
Really? George Carlin would disagree with you. He says you can be down to the last guy on Earth, and that crazy motherfucker will attack the mirror.
Yeah, but who is he really hurting?
I hope you're right, Ben. I am very cynical. Have been since at least high school. I hope for the best, but I ready myself for the worst.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's too different from how you feel and how you think, but
No, I'm close to that. Maybe the ratio is a little bit different, but it's probably not too far off.
I said in our chat, now you're not privy to our chat, but we have a network chat to organize podcasts and whatnot, and it tends to delve into all kinds of random silliness, right, Alexis?
I'm pleading the fifth on this one. The one thing I did want to add, Ben, you can clearly see that Merritt's got a bunch of comic books on his table, all Marvel. Do you recognize any of those?
I'd have to pull up the page. Probably, I think I recognized a few of them when I looked at it a little bit earlier. Let me see if I can jump over to.
Yeah, I can clearly see a Spider-Man cover and a Hulk cover.
Yeah, the Hulk cover is probably that was a current Hulk issue at the time. The Spider-Man issue is a little bit older because I know because of the little tiny corner, like upper left-hand box, because I know what that picture of Spider-Man looked like for, basically from 1962 to present. That's, the depth of my Spider-Man fandom. There's a copy of Ecstatics on the table, which was a current comic at the time, which is actually gonna be making a comeback pretty soon, I hear. And the Captain America issue on the table was current at that time. It was you see, like, it's the poster that Merritt later on holds up to try to get Cap to sign. It's a poster done by John Cassidy from the series that he did with John Neeraber at right around that same time. It's actually a very good story. It deals a little bit with sort of post 9/11 themes, which Marvel was a little bit hit and miss with when and where and how they handled that time period and how they chose to either incorporate it into the Marvel universe or kind of sidestep it. But judging by the look of what's on the table, most of that stuff, it was just current comics of the general time period from within a year or so.
Yeah, I'm seeing something that I can't quite make out the title, but it looks like Rawhide Kid.
Yep, that's I don't know if that's a current issue, if that was current to the time or not, but that was a Western title that Marvel published. It's that was a current that was a 2002 2003-ish issue of Rawhide Kid because it has the Marvel Max logo on it. Which was basically Marvel's answer to Vertigo. It was their way of being able to do mature 18+ comics. It was really, the majority of the reason why they created that imprint and that Max label was to be able to give Garth Ennis free reign on the Punisher.
It's a bear. Rawr.
Even after that, where the Max Punisher that Ennis ended up making was even more violent and even more creepy.
One of my favorite memories of doing this podcast was Welcome Back, Frank. We had so much fun talking about that. Speaking
that comic is bad shit, man. I have that. I'm actually looking at the first issue of it right now. It's on my wall. That comic was awesome.
I don't know if that.
Rest in peace, Steve Dillon, by the way.
We did that when Punisher Season 1 came out on Netflix, so I think it's on this feed. And if it is, yeah, if you haven't listened to older episodes of Source Material, you should absolutely go find our Welcome Back, Frank episode. A lot of gags came out of that show, not the least of which was Mon Nucci got the ill communication. But
a guy got chucked off the Empire State Building in the first issue, man.
I just wanted to say real quick, and then I want to talk a little bit more about this issue, and then we can move on. One of the things that comes up in the show, The Falcon and Winter Soldier, and came up in the chat, was one of the things that I liked about it and it points to what's talked about in this issue is the idea of making amends and doing better. And some people like Falcon's speech at the end of the show. Some people were nonplussed by it. Different strokes, whatever. I'm not going to litigate that tonight. I might not even litigate it on Thursday when we talk about it. Either way, I liked it. And I like the idea of, look, no one's ever going to be perfect, but you can always do better. And you should. Going through life not making mistakes is almost impossible. Probably very much is impossible. But you can always make amends. And you can always do better. And you can always evolve and change and try to better yourself as a person. And it's something I really believe in my heart. And I don't always figure it out, but I do try. And it's something very deeply personal to me. The concept of amends and changing for the better. So it's what they're talking about in this issue. It's what they're talking about in the show. And that certainly makes me relate to it so much more. One of the things that happens in this issue number 6, the whitewash, speaks to what was going on, especially in the latter half of the mid to 20th century, which is the idea of black communism, and the idea of blacks kind of becoming very self-aware, and this sort of cultural movement of back to Africa, and ideas of we live in this country, but we are not part of this country, and again, I go back to black communism and the idea of a lot of black people identifying with the workers' movement and things like that. And this issue speaks to some of that when Adolf Hitler and Goebbels are like, why do you fight for a country that hates you? Why do you fight for a country that did what they did to you? That sees you as something to be experimented on and thrown away and mopped up when you explode? Why give your life to them in pursuit of an ideal that was never intended for you? And his answer is, my wife would kill me, implication being that despite those things, there is the belief inherent in many, not all, but many black people of, this country may have never been for me, intended for me, but it can be for me. And it's worth fighting for. The ideals of America can be applied to people of all colors and creeds, and it's something worth fighting for. And so I'll fight for it, because to fight for you is to fight for fascism. And it's a Faustian bargain for you to say, if you fight for fascism, you'll be free. It's an oxymoron in terms.
There's also, can I throw something in real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no. You feel the need to interrupt me. You wouldn't be the first. You're not going to be the last. Go ahead.
There's also something that I always keep in the back of my mind, and I think there's a little bit of subtext dealing with that here. Even going back to the very first issue, we see Isaiah Bradley is not a fool. He's very clear-eyed and very mindful and kind of pragmatic about what the world is and what what the world has dealt him, and I see you have the embodiment of the leader of a fascist regime extending you some kind of trying to make a deal with you. Even back then, it wasn't you got the sense. It wasn't hard to get the sense that, in a fascist regime on a long enough timeline, everybody fails the purity test. You know what I'm saying?
Sure, absolutely.
I see, I see that, once again, the person I think of most often is Nick Fuentes, who I'm actually kind of repulsed to have to drop his name in this podcast, but somebody who has a half Latino family member, and which is where his name comes from, and yet he still considers himself a white supremacist in no uncertain terms. And aside from my own personal repulsion at that idea, my thing is sooner or later, you're going to fail the purity test. You're, looking a certain way or aligning yourself with certain people will only take you so far. If you get everything that you want, if you get the perfect white utopia that you want, eventually you will find yourself not being white enough.
Mm-hmm. Again, George Carlin. Anything else, Ben? You want to talk more about this issue? Your thoughts? I really like the conversation between Hitler, Goebbels, and Bradley and what came out of it. I kind of wish I got a little bit more than guys know my wife would kill me, because there's implication there, there's pointing to, but I kind of wish, and maybe that's one of the strengths of the comic, is that as heady as it is and as deep as it is, it's not particularly preachy. There's not a lot of speechifying going on. I kind of wish, though, there had been a little bit more of that for maybe some people who maybe don't get it, but that's just me. Your thoughts on this issue in total, whatever it is you want to say, and then Alexis, go ahead.
Just one last thing, the issue ends with Isaiah's rejecting Hitler's offer, and they're like, okay, well, pack him up and send him to Mengele for more experimentation. We'll make some use out of him, one way or another. And he's rescued on the way there by some guerrilla fighters in Germany. The one thing I'm trying to figure out, I think, knowing what I know, what I picked up on the art style, like the lawyer in the present day that's sitting with Captain America and with Merritt, I think his name is Damien. I'm trying to see, like, if on the last page, if that was meant to resemble, like, if that was meant to resemble him, like it was one of his relatives, which wouldn't surprise me if that's what they were trying to get across. It looks a little too similar to him to be a coincidence, but
I assume going what they did with casting with the Spider-Man Homecoming, that the principal is cast as this. It's the same actor who played one of the Howley Commandos, and he's
I love
it because he's supposed to be his grandson.
I love that part.
Yeah, I'm assuming that was it, because it's like, you're right, it's way too much of a coincidence. It had to have been his grandfather, and it's clear that they did that, so there was absolutely no confusion on the behalf of the reader going, wait, was that the guy? No.
And he also mentions he's half German, like in the conversation that they're having, so there's that too.
Yeah, and he still gets insulted.
Yeah, well, once again, sooner or later, everybody fails the purity test.
Mm-hmm.
Alexis, your thoughts? Issue number 6.
I said it before. Merritt's speech and the things he talks about, it is truly haunting to see the parallels between that and what we see with Republicans in the here and now. Not all Republicans, but, because I don't want to open that can of worms. But I know, too late. But it really, it is very scary to see parallels between that and now.
I'm sorry. All you Republicans are fucking racist, horrible pigs. But not you. You're fine. Not you, guy.
Well, I'm sorry. Would it have been better if I said Trump supporters?
Qualifiers are always nice. Some, not all.
Okay, fine. I was trying to back away from just saying Trump supporters in general, and I ended up stepping on a bigger minefield. I was trying to be delicate. I just walked into something worse. I am so sorry. No, I mean, let me put it this way. What you were saying about how Trump appealed to the white man, again, you find parallels to that in the rise of Nazism. Mm-hmm. Hitler said the same things to Germany after they lost so much from World War I. They lost so much land. They lost so much control. They lost so much respect. And he basically came in saying, oh, it's not Germany's fault. It's Jews' fault. And it's gypsies' faults. And it's all these other countries' faults.
And homosexuals and this and that. If only we were not beset by such mongrels and animals, we would be better off as people.
Yeah, and it really is terrifying that you see that mentality repeat over and over and over. Human beings do not want to accept blame. We do not want to say we screwed up. We do not want to see that the fault lies within ourselves. We want to know that there is another force at play that is screwing us over, because it is so much easier for us to just point the gun at them than to look in ourselves and try to better ourselves.
It's not an easy thing to do. People spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on therapy to learn how to make internal change, because it's so much easier and so much more natural to look outward at the rest of the world and feel victimized. It's a very natural state of being, unfortunately, for the human psyche, and it takes work to go against it. It's you're swimming upstream, you're walking up the down staircase. And that's what we have, in part, the mental health field for, is to help people deal with the uncomfortable truths about themselves. It's not easy, and people hate it, and they rather... And boy, am I not going off on this tangent, so I'm just going to make a statement and we'll move on. But this is why people would, prefer pills to therapy and work. It's like, I just don't want to feel anything. God, don't make me do stuff. Don't make me do stuff, George Bush said. That's a Family Guy reference. George, they've attacked the towers. Oh God, don't make me do stuff. All right. Issue number 7, The Black Vine. Rogers confronts Walker Price in Arlington National Cemetery and learns that Reinstein and Koch once were collaborators on a joint American-German super soldier serum project before World War II. The convoy the black soldiers had disrupted was resupplying Koch's continuation of the project, which was being conducted at the laboratory in the concentration camp that Bradley subsequently destroyed. Faith Bradley is revealed as the woman in the burqa after Isaiah was repatriated in April 1943. He was incarcerated at Leavenworth for stealing the uniform before being pardoned by Eisenhower in 1960. And let's everyone now do a collective shudder. Ugh. Although he survived, the serum and the lack of treatment during his imprisonment left Isaiah with brain damage, and he has reverted to childhood mentality. He remains popular and well-known in the black community, and the walls of the apartment are covered with pictures in which he poses with celebrities. Faith takes a picture of Isaiah and Rogers together to add to the wall, with Isaiah wearing the shredded uniform confiscated from Merritt. So, just a quick thought, because I've been talking a lot about the last 2 issues, and I want to give you guys your time here. So I'll just say that having worked in jails for the past decade, the idea of you served your country, you were experimented on, all these horrible things happened, but you also stole a uniform, so 30 years to prison for you. Like, just, gosh, if you could hear it, my eyes are rolling in the back of my head. And it's nice that he was pardoned by Eisenhower and very kind of true to what might have really happened in a situation like that. But still, like, a little too little too late. But what I was getting to was the idea of prolonged isolation causing mental deterioration. It's a very real thing. It's something that we struggle with. I'm not going to argue that it's not entirely necessary at times, not for 30 fucking years, but certain situations where I wish there were better alternatives, and maybe there are, but some, isolation in an incarceration setting is a real thing, and it's a real tool in the tool belt, and it can have very real, very ugly consequences. And I'm kind of glad that the book spoke to that, to the degree that it does. And that's it. I'm going to give my final thought here on the whole thing, and then I'm going to give each of you your turn to speak about the issue, and then your final thoughts, and then we'll close up for the night, since we're running a bit long. I really like this. I like anything that generates a conversation, as uncomfortable as it might be. And it felt more editorial than it did comic book. It felt like, well, I want to say things about the black experience, but I want people to read it. So, it's kind of like Jay Sherman on The Critic. I'm reading this on a driver's ed class because it's the only way people will see an essay about criticism. It's using the comic book format to talk about a serious issue and not just bang, bang, boom, boom, which I like. I think there's plenty of that, and there needs to be... Look, I'm all for Transformers versus My Little Pony. I think that needs to happen. I think we need those things. But I think we also need the occasional truth, red, black, and white. This was an important book, which many of us might not have even known about, except, for Disney and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and bravo to them for as much criticism as Disney and Marvel get for various reasons, and deservedly so. Credit where credit's due. I applaud them for the bravery of including this in their show, their silly show about a guy flying around with mechanical wings. I think it's great. I think it generated a great conversation. I'm very happy with the conversation that we had tonight, and I hope there are conversations like this happening because of this book and because of the show throughout the country and throughout the world. You know, I think change begins with conversation. Good positive change at the very least, and I think people need to talk to each other and express, disgust and disappointment and hope. It's the only way things are going to change, in my opinion. So I'm very happy we did the show tonight, and I'm very happy with how it's turned out. And I'll turn it over to you, Alexis, for your thoughts on the issue and the comic at large.
There's no doubt in my mind that he was given solitary confinement as basically their way of saying, essentially covering everything up. They mention when the government, the major general, whatever it is, mentions when we cut to Bradley jumping out of the helicopter, says we have a new level of deniability here. They did this to him so they could basically just erase everything that happened. He was the last thread. He was the only person left who knew what they did and would potentially talk about it. And they wanted to get rid of him as quickly as possible. And it is absolutely disgusting, the fact that, he did all of that, and his welcome home was, okay, now go to jail for stealing a uniform, of all things. So I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of this. I misread the issues because of a glitch with the layout of the website I went to, and I read issue 7 before I read issue 1, and frankly, I think it's actually better that way. I think it really gives you some incredible support and sympathy for Bradley, that you know what he went through and where he's going to end up, and then you watch everything that happens to him leading to that point. I think it just is so tragic, but I greatly enjoyed it more that way. And I actually did a little bit more reading. Bradley does show up in some future comics. In fact, the wedding of T'Challa and Storm, he's a guest of honor there, and they wheel him in a wheelchair, and he doesn't really know what's going on, but they want him there. And it's just such a great scene with Falcon and the others realizing who he is. Luke Cage is particularly moved because he went through something very similar to what Bradley did with the experiments that gave him his powers.
Mm-hmm. They actually did a very good job of referencing that on the first season of Luke Cage. All right, Ben, your thoughts?
Okay. I want, I have to speak as an artist about this. I would like, if you guys have this comic, available to look at right now, I would like you to take a moment and look through the pages of this final issue. And when we started, we talked about, how cartoonish and how outlandish and how over the top Kyle Baker's drawing was, and how I said that was intentional. That was intended to create a certain effect and to create a certain mood, and how that changes over the course of these 7 issues. And what happened by the time we get to issue 7, first of all, Kyle Baker's obviously a lot more comfortable with these characters, and it's markedly much less cartoonish and much less exaggerated than it was at the beginning. The characters are, very kind of grounded. We see Captain America talking with Price in the graveyard. The proportion, it's Captain America, so of course he's this gigantic mountain of a man, but it's not what it was previously. It's not deformity with the muscular proportions, and it's not it's a lot more grounded. The facial expressions are really, the faces are really expressive. The storytelling, is exactly what it needs to be. It's less chaotic because it doesn't need to be chaotic anymore. Now we're coming back down to earth. Now we're dealing with the fallout and, in theory, the resolution and the, I guess, recompense would be a good word for all of the horror that we've already seen. And the art reflects that. And I think that's why, like I said, towards the beginning of the story, the artwork was not my cup of tea. I thought, it wasn't, it's why I passed it up in the first place when I originally, was flipping through it, because it just didn't, the art didn't do it for me at the time. If I had had the time to read it in depth, I might have felt differently, because it was intentional. It was intended to create this effect that you're kind of going on a journey through both the storytelling and the art. And like you said, comic books have a tremendous power as an art form and as a medium of storytelling of doing that. I love comic books so very much. That's why I've dedicated so much of my life to that style of artwork, because I think it has so much power to do these sorts of things that no other style of artwork, no other medium of artwork can do in quite the same way. So I will always champion this sort of thing. And I love, this is why I love talking, being on the show and talking about comics, because I get to talk about these things that I ordinarily wouldn't get to talk about how, how you can sort of, generate emotions and different kinds of emotions through the art style, and how that complements the storytelling, and how that complements the dialogue. And all of that is happening here. And by the time we get to the end and we see, Isaiah in his own home, and you would think with all that's happened to him, you would expect a broken man and a sort of really what we see a little bit more of in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But here you don't. He's not broken, and some of that has to do with just some of the brain damage that he suffers. But you get the sense that he's in a better place, and you see him towards the end of the story, and it's like, it's like coming back to a long lost old friend, who you might have been really worried about for a while. And you find out he's doing okay. He's, for the most part, in a good place. He went to hell and back, and Steve Rogers here wants to do right by him still, even in the smallest way he possibly can. And that's what comes of this. By the way, if nothing else, given what we know about the MCU and about what we've seen of the MCU, not just in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but in a lot of other previous MCU properties, this has a better than average chance of actually happening. If they can ever bring Chris Evans back to play Captain America, I hope to God it is for this scene at the end of this issue. So as far as this issue, that's kind of what I wanted to say the most. I have overall thoughts, but if you want to circle back, we can do that.
Nope. No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Before a lot of this MCU stuff happened, the first year, around 2008, when Iron Man and Incredible Hulk came out, and we were just starting to get a sense of where it was all going. Just a hint, because none of us had any idea. We all hoped that it would end up being as fun as it ended up being, and thankfully we were proven right for the most part. I mean, I'm a huge MCU fan. I think they've rarely gone wrong in terms of just raw entertainment value. But me and my friends, we would talk about what some of these future movie adaptations would be, now that when it seemed obvious, okay, they're going to do Avengers. They're going to introduce all of these characters in their own movies, and then they're going to do an Avengers movie. So we were saying, like, what would a Captain America movie be? And we saw, like, you know, in parts of Incredible Hulk what it might look like physically, and it ended up looking pretty close to what was going on in that movie in terms of the physicality. But in terms of, like, the story, we were like, well, what, you know, and I said then, because I know from the comics and I know from the, you know, all of these different materials, you know, Captain America, his whole thing is throughout, you know, all of this American history that the comic is paralleled. He says, he's always said, my greatest loyalty is to the American dream. So we started thinking, you know, what is the American dream? What does the American dream look like in the 21st century? What would the American dream look like to somebody who basically slept through most of the 20th century? And, you know, it's different things for different people. And I think it's an important thing for the character as far as Captain America to recognize that it is different for everybody, that everybody's experience is different, and that it's important to, you know, to give even the bad experiences, even the nightmarish parts of the American dream that people experience, to give them the dignity that they deserve. And that seemed like, you know, you didn't know that at the beginning of the story, but, like, this was basically Cap's sort of quest to give, you know, to give Isaiah Bradley some measure of his dignity back that was taken from him. And it's the tiniest bit of, you know, it's the tiniest bit that he possibly, you know, that he could manage, but it's still something. He gave him something back, you know, for everything that he had, you know, that he had to sacrifice. And, you know, you didn't know that at the beginning, but at the end, it's like, oh, it clicks and you got it. And this is what this was about. This was about somebody who had everything taken from him, and just the fact that, you know, somebody knew, somebody cared, somebody appreciated it.
Was there anything more, Ben?
I think that's it from me.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for talking about this week tonight. We went very long, but there was a lot to unpack here, and I think it needed the space to breathe. So that concludes our look at Truth, Red, White, and Black. This week on the Radulich Broadcasting Network, earlier today we dropped another Mania of WrestleMania. This time we looked at WrestleMania 2. Chris Bailey was on the show, and we looked at, you know, the day after WrestleMania 1 all the way up to WrestleMania 2, all the things that impacted that show and made it what it was, the rise of Saturday Night's main event, the winning of the Super Bowl by the Chicago Bears, all of that that led to WrestleMania 2, including the thought that Mr. T would become a pro boxer for the WWF. What a fun story. Tomorrow, we are reviewing Wrath of Man and Deadpool the Duck on 2 different shows. May 12th is the Superblog Team-Up. We've got entries for A Long Road to Ruin. We're looking at the Eddie Murphy Dr. Dolittle movies. And Jesse and I reviewed Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. And I tell great stories about how I had to explain some of those songs to my kid because I was playing it in the car. Tune in to find out what I had to say. We're also going to be reviewing Weezer Van Weezer. And then Thursday, a whole gang of us will get together to praise and gush over Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but Robert Winfrey will be there to say we're all dumb and it was terrible. So that'll be fun. Listen to Rob Winfrey yell at us for an hour. It'll be fantastic, right, Alexis?
Sure, why not?
Robert says hi. By the way, he was in the comment section of the Raw chat that he was the Raw review that he does.
Oh, perfect. On Friday, Spiral comes to theaters. We'll be releasing our Long Road to Ruin parts 1 and 2, where I think it was Robert Winfrey and Sean Comer reviewed the entire Saw franchise up to that point. It's a archive show from years past with artwork by Benjamin J. Cologne. So that's wonderful. You got to see some of that. Great piece.
Love that title card.
Yeah, it's one of your good ones, one of your best. Myself and Robert Winfrey will be reviewing The Woman in the Window. And if all goes according to plan, newcomer to the Radulich Broadcasting Network, podcaster Jeff Sloboda will be coming on Damn You Hollywood to review the Anna Kendrick science fiction Netflix movie Stowaway. Saturday, Jesse is airing a syndicated source material for What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man. And on Sunday, we're re-airing our review of Daredevil Season 2, and myself and Sean Comer will be reviewing Shadow and Bone. You can check out all of last week's shows in the archive. We review Jessica Jones, Scott Pilgrim, Pennyworth. We re-aired Rogue One, our review of Brujeria, Viva Presidente Trump, AEW Blood and Guts, The Mitchells vs. the Machines. All of it. My wife from years past was on a long road to ruin for the Twilight Saga. I wish we had known you back then, because you hadn't started doing artwork for us yet. But what a title card you could have produced for Twilight, Ben.
I've done Twilight-related artwork in a similar style for some other friends of mine. I got notes about it, though. I could have gone farther.
What could have been? Anyway,
they told me I should. They told me I had drawn the Cullens as vampires, or the only thing I would have done was put Buffy the Vampire Slayer behind them. That was the note that I got. I'm like, damn it, that would have been a great idea.
If you ever do one, I want them nice and glittery. Okay, just like disco balls.
You got it.
That's all for me, thanks. I'm driving. Alexis Hejna, you have a podcast, you have a company, you have all kinds of things you need to talk about. Please, go ahead and do so.
Yeah, first and foremost, among other things that are getting aired this weekend, this Saturday, we will be airing our first ever trivia show for the Radulich Broadcasting Network, Tripped Up Trivia. We recorded that just a few days ago. We're going through and editing out all the long pauses while we waited for people to give their answers, because Lord knows none of you want to listen to that. But the theme was sci-fi. We had a great time. We actually learned a few interesting things through the questions.
Like Spock's Jewish?
Yeah, so much fun when we actually have to interrupt the show and say, okay, hang on. We actually have to confirm if Spock is half Jewish or not. Because somebody was putting up such an argument that they deserved half a point for the question. I was like, wait a minute, I need to confirm this.
Jason Teasley should have gone into law.
For the record, I do hope Jason is feeling better. Little spoiler alert, he was one of our contestants but had to bow out early. He was having a side effect of a certain vaccine and was not feeling good. So, Jason, I do hope you're feeling better, man. But yes, the first edition of Tripped Up Trivia will air on Saturday. We're making plans to start our next edition, which we'll record next month, and the theme is going to be female superheroes. We're still looking for contestants, so if that's something you think you'd be interested in, hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. Let us know. And moving on, the next thing I got to plug is my company, Honeysuckle Rose Creations, where fashion meets fandom at the intersection of geek and chic. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be doing a sale for Memorial Day weekend, along with a charity drive that's going to benefit tiny homes for homeless veterans here in Kansas City. This is a wonderful charity we've been involved with in the past. We're really happy to be working with them again. We'll be posting more information about that pretty soon. And in the meantime, we're also getting ready because we are finally getting back on the road. The Comic Cons have opened back up. We are going to be the con here in Kansas City. I am so excited, especially since guest of honor is Billy Zane, starring one of my favorite horror movies, Demon Knight. So excited!
I am 98% happy for you. The 2% unhappy is it means I have less access to you now for podcast because you might actually having to be working, like real working.
How many times have I recorded for you, either in a hotel room because I just got back from a convention, or on the freaking road while I was driving?
All right. Now I'm 100% happy for you again.
All right. But yes, in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and our shops are fully stocked. on Etsy and handmade at Amazon. Again, that's Honeysuckle Rose Creations, the intersection of geek and chic.
All right, before you do your plugs, Ben, I have a question for you. You're sitting there on you got your Twitch going, right? You got your sketch pad out. You're doing sketches on Twitch. What are you listening to while you like to draw? What provides the soundtrack to your muse?
Right now, I listen to all kinds of stuff, but right now I'm really like like heavy into synthwave, like 80s style synthwave now. So
give me
that's
a band.
LeBrock.
Okay.
So that's not for everybody, but it's been kind of scratching an itch for me lately. But I like all kinds of stuff. I like hard rock. I like hip hop. I like all kinds of stuff like that. The problem is I can't play any of that stuff on Twitch. I have to play Pretzel, which is royalty free. Otherwise, I'm gonna get copyright swatted. So, but they got some decent. That's actually how I discovered LeBrock, is because they have some stuff on Pretzel's channel that they make available royalty free. So it kind of reignited my love of like 80s synthwave, and power ballad singing, that sort of thing. But it sucked the hardest when a couple of weeks ago I did DMX for Sketchbook Saturday, and I absolutely would have had his music playing the whole time if I could.
You should have just had dogs barking. It would have been the same thing, right? Speaking of DMX and LeBrock and all kinds of ill shit, if you want to check any of that out, or any of the bands that we talk about on the Metal Hammer of Doom, like Motley Crue, or Scooter from the Mortal Kombat soundtrack, KMFDM, or Alexis Hejna's favorite band of late, Fits and Starts, you can go click our link at getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network. That's getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network to get a free 30 days of Amazon Music. You can check out and stream all kinds of stuff, anything that suits your heart's desire, the soundtrack to The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or WandaVision, or any of the other Marvel soundtracks. It's all there. They have a great selection of music, and you can experience it all for 30 days, unlimited, with our link at getamazonmusic.com/W2M Network. Benjamin J. Cologne, the floor is yours. Take me home, baby doll.
Oh, this will be a quick one. I've managed to get my plugs down to like a few quick blurbs, because I am now Epic Benjamin J on all of the things. I am Epic Benjamin J on all of the social medias, including Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and now YouTube, where I am archiving a lot of my previous Twitch streams. I've saved almost all of them. I'm trying to archive them as I go. I've got at least 50 videos up on my channel now, up to about halfway through December of 2020. I hope to find a few spare moments to upload a few more before I go on a bit of a hiatus for my Twitch channel. It kind of sucks that I got to plug a hiatus right now, but there's a lot of content out there to watch, and I will probably find some way to stream here and there while I'm on vacation, because I never ever stop drawing, because I don't consider that work by and large, and I always try to and encourage everybody else to always make friends through art. Very, very important. That's something that I, try to spread the word of at any convenience that I'm afforded.
All right, so for Alexis Hejna and Benjamin J. Cologne, who I greatly appreciate spending almost over 2 hours with me tonight. This might be the longest source material we've done in ages. Thank you for listening to our discussion of Truth, Red, White, and Black. I'm Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.